So we've just came out of a truly special immersion here in Mexico where you've introduced this brand new methodology in the meditations. Could you tell us more about why you decided to bring this to the group this time around?
Well, there are several reasons for doing that. One of them, perhaps, is rooted in the fact that bringing Patanjali Yoga Sutras into the context of this tantric work, which already gains the momentum and known for its very unique flavor, is that Patanjali Sutras were the very first yogic document that I have studied in depth back in the days and kept returning to it. Alongside of the Bhagavad Gita, it was at some point one of my favorite scriptures. There are also reasons for that. I was struck by the clarity, the concise format of the sutras, and of course the input into that deeper spiritual psychology of how all these psychic impressions, all this memory, all this what goes into the conglomerate of body-mind plays its role, and some of it contributes and some of it becoming obstacles on a way of seeing things clearly for what they are, and that is seeing that all this is being lit by the light of our own consciousness and nothing else. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is because I have noticed that with that, let's say, utterly and entirely effortless, spontaneous approach and emphasis, there is a potential begin to present itself or slip in that made some of the participants of our programs perhaps confuse what is really going on in terms of the complexity of that, what really unfolds here. So this has been quite a wrestling for a while to take this decision. So I felt simply maybe a moment has arisen to do that.
So this work is well known for the spontaneous nature of this energetic process, which some people absolutely love and they keep coming back for it. But some people, they're almost frightened by it or even like deterred by it. Now we're introducing these Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which stand in stark contrast to this spontaneous unfoldment that happens during meditation. So what is the rationale for bringing this into the work?
Well, yes, the main incentive was to introduce something which would potentially not create an opposing force to that what is known as a spontaneous unfoldment with all the ensuing spontaneity of the movements and sounds for which we have even gave a special term, which should not be used, I think, frivolously with regard to any such manifestations, because the term that we've implemented recently as samavesha or samavesha kriya is reserved for a more refined stage of the, let's say, archetypal forces that beneath of all our personalities and individualities begin to take over. But along with that, something in the Patanjali Sutras that I kept returning over the years that felt to me striking in its clarity with regard to what the sutras overall speak. And of course, what I've mentioned just a moment ago, because my own sadhana was structured in the sutras in the TMCT course, which is based on also on these sutras from the 3rd chapter. We have reevaluated this. I've looked into this attentively, And I felt, well, let us do this as an investigation, as an experiment of sorts. And the idea was to bring it into a live program, such as this one we just had, and try it out, simply try it out and see how it goes. And so, as you know, the feedback was quite promising, quite encouraging. So the rationale behind it is to deepen this work, whilst also so as not to get those who, let's say, amidst of certain processes, to be scattered all over the place. So let's just put it this way for the time being.
I've heard you mention the theme of effort and effortlessness quite a bit. How does that relate to this new methodology that we brought to this immersion?
Well, that's also could be said that that fine balance, that dance, that between when to apply effort, when let it go, that effortlessness, which is also exemplified by that's also the term pathless path, right? That all non-dual traditions are known for, so that we are not traversing, we're not traveling from being to some kind of other being, right? That beingness, the self, is all we have. So at a certain plane, at a certain level, nothing ever has happened. And that is undeniably so. Whilst at this level of reality we partake, right? Let's say at the furthest shore of manifestation, at the edge of the senses, where we experience this world in the myriad of ways of how it manifests and how it presents itself. There is this, let's say, movement. There's movement. So effortlessness and effort, therefore, here perfectly exemplified by the combining two very different systems into one. The system of Patanjali, which belongs to the Samkhya Yoga, and what is known and unfolds under the umbrella of non-dual Tantra, of Trikashaivism. So it's this, you see that perhaps what was a missing element, of course it's remained to be seen, because it will be very interesting how those who participated in this program will find it in the longer term. But based on my own experiences of those I knew over many years ago, those who went also through profound phases of awakening and transformation of consciousness, whose sadhana was really structured in, let's say, something as precise as what Patanjali Sutras represent here. It has that distinctive, undeniable, scientific element that the sutras work with. Whilst we can also find that same very intellectual, very, very cutting through it all, understanding in the Trikashaiva philosophy. But at the face value, they're kind of two different systems. One is dual, one is non-dual. Yet what I felt compelled and inspired is to bring these distinctive analogies which are exemplified in what Trikashaivism is known for as the trinity of the seer, seeing and seen, as that Shiva, Shakti, Nara, as that individual, and what is exemplified in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras through the very, very goal of the sutras, that state of fusion of the very same modalities represented by the seer, seeing and seen. So there are analogies, undeniably, just like in the philosophical systems. If the goal is the ultimate, they're bound to be shared territory. So this is what we build on. And the effortlessness is, I think, is where also what makes it really open to these beautiful possibilities in terms of one's own unfoldment as far as the sadhana is concerned.
What did you actually notice in the room happening energetically once we brought this methodology in, and how did that compare to past immersions that you've led?
That's very interesting. You should ask that, because, and as you know, that when we give it to spontaneity almost from get-going, often I have to hold people back, right? Particularly when our programs made of people from various walks of life, when we have old-timers, advanced ones, and the newcomers, people of different ages, right? We often that is asking those who already amidst of an intensity of the process to ever so slightly hold back, at least in the ensuing phases of the guided meditation, because the process is there. It's just like, it doesn't need to have any ignition. It's ready to go at any time, so that the others can also hear the guidance. And then I release everyone in with that invitation that is kind of also very well known by now, that everyone who has delved in, experienced this work, that let the spontaneity take over, or let the spontaneity reign supreme. And I don't need to say it twice. The room isn't like immediately explodes sometimes, right? And so often this is at the expense of those who feel disoriented, for whom maybe the intensity of the process is not there, or the work is new. What we have noticed, however, in this particular program, with the implementation of the sutras, by the time we have learned this set of sutras and tried them all together, and which necessitated to structure then our meditation through what could be defined three, let's say, phases. That phase of building that stage to where the condition for the aforementioned samyama, the togetherness of the last three limbs of yoga, can be met, where that uninterrupted flow can be created towards a particular object of meditation, so that that integration is met, right? That's samyama, first phase. Then followed by the second phase, where the sutras are implemented. And then after that, releasing it, as it were, into that complete and utter carefree spontaneity, whatever may rise, let's just remain a detached witness. What we've noticed is that the quality of meditations were very, very different. On one hand, everyone could experience that deep inner silence, stillness, savor it. And when the time came to release this all into the spontaneity, it somehow felt that even that had a new quality to that. Even that had this more orchestrated, I don't want to say organized, but literally orchestrated in terms of how this would manifest. Yes, of course, stresses, whatever the traumas, whatever the build-up, had to still be released, and that is plenty of that. But overall, I felt personally very, very intrigued, satisfied, and kind of reassured that this is potentially a big way forward as far as that unique, unusual program as our programs, our live immersions.
Yeah, and speaking from someone who has now attended 8 immersions, I totally felt that the coherence of the group was way more aligned and just way more viscerally felt once we introduced these sutras. So
exactly, yeah.
I share that as well. So I'd love to ask, who is this program for?
Well, it's for everyone, right? It's ultimately for everyone. And of course, it's for everyone, and yet it's not for everyone. It's for someone who, I would say, definitely someone who would like to have a solid foundation in terms of what meditation itself really represents as a methodology, as this timeless way of building upon and generating that necessary, let's say, ways of how one can experience this life for what it is, because it's a tremendous culturing of the nervous system. So this program is therefore can be seen as applicable to, I don't know if it's two groups of people we can here bring. The seekers who are already advanced, who have proficiency, great level of understanding, experience, and they already have some process on the way, some distinctive process. And yet, it's lacking of some structure. And yet, it almost requires something which will funnel that process in a much more orchestrated manner. And the second group, I would say, is the group of professionals. Group of professionals, what I mean by that is people who work with others. In other words, it's for therapists, for teachers alike, for scientists, for people in respective professions of psychology, and why not to invite people from the fields of psychiatry as well to try and test something new in terms of, seeing the complexity of what and how human nervous system really displays its tremendous potential. So on a more kind of like, let's say, rudimentary practical, like in day-to-day level, of course, it's if people want to really get beneath of understanding of what is happening at the level of consciousness in terms of that whole conversation of manifesting a better reality for oneself, manifesting one's dreams, and so forth. I have strong feeling, which is not just a kind of a feeling based, but a strong feeling in terms of the potential of what this program can do for those who would like to, understand how the mind itself functions, including its limitations and what mind really stands for, and to be able to think from the subtlest level of the mind. It's because the program contains these distinctive aspects. One, where we allow transcending the mind, we literally allow that abstract dissolution of the mind, which could be exemplified in this all-encompassing, all-embracing movement. And once that is met, once, let's say, the rudimentary level of the mind and all its superficial layers are being transcended, and the thought becomes more and more and more abstract, there comes a moment when we are literally getting submerged into transcendence. And at that point, introducing the sutra, it's introducing the very opposite movement, which is a laser-like funneling attention to what this or that sutra represents, is what is unique about that approach. And that's what's unique about the Patanjali Sutras, if we are to speak about the extraordinary, let's say, legacy of that particular scripture, because no other scripture on yoga enjoyed more interest, popularity, and recognition among the enthusiasts, scholars, and, of course, hardcore yogis, if we are to speak about those for whom the sutras were written in the first place.
So, manifesting, huge buzzword that you hear everywhere today. I think most people's idea of the word manifesting is maybe like positive affirmations or creating some sort of vision board. Can you talk a little bit more about the limitations of that approach and why it doesn't necessarily get you what you want in life, and why this methodology does? You talked a little bit more about the subtlety of this process, but maybe what are the pitfalls of like the existing models of manifestation and manifesting?
Well, I don't want to kind of make myself sounding as an expert on the topic, and kind of also dismissing what is out there that promises to provide. What I have come across and what I have encountered, it seems has some legitimacy behind it. Yes, of course, there is, let's say, what is known as intention setting. It has its value. It definitely has its place, right? Intentions creates a certain direction towards an object of our desire, whatever that happens to be. There are techniques of visualization, talks of unless you can visualize yourself, let's say, driving that car, riding that bicycle, or being in that relationship, living in that house, how can you expect that to come your way? But these are very superficial levels of understanding what visualization even stands for. Because one working here with an aspect of the mind which is at the superficial level, at the level of what is thinking mind represents. So even the methodology of all this manifesting is at the horizontal level of the mind's activity. Whereas the yogic understanding of realization is pulling the fabric, that horizontal fabric, with something that can create that gravity where that, what, as it were, represented by the objects of our desire, object of our, let's say, attention, begins to converge at the level where these aspects themselves spring forth. So the manifestation doesn't happen at the level of surface level of thinking. It happens at the level where desire springs forth, where the objects themselves, that subject-object dynamic springs forth, where everything and all the laws of nature are in a state of their manifestation itself. So we are getting underneath. This is why we brought into this program the curriculum of Kashmir Shaivism, the process of manifestation itself, so as to get us that overview of the templates of consciousness. All of that, what goes into 36 tattvas, categories of consciousness, from Shiva down to earthly plane of existence, so as to then have it as a reference point. So again, as not sounding or the danger of sounding dismissive towards what's out there, placing something on the fridge and seeing it every day, right? That becoming familiar with that, let's say, visual board of one's objects of desire is extremely limiting, because to begin with, it's pinpointing to something which already belongs to the very dynamic of subject and object. Whereas we need to go at the level when subject and object are intermingled, ideally fused. If we can touch that level, that's the nuclear level. That's where the tremendous energy is released. And thinking at that level is where all genius, all breakthroughs, scientific, any creative, let's say, inspirational ideas, poetic inspiration of any kind comes from that level. It doesn't come from the level of superficial level of speech, tantrically speaking, right? That Vaikari, that the fourth, the final, where everything is coagulated, crystallized. It's not alive. It's already crystallized. It took form. And thought itself moves from form to form to form. Nothing is fluid. Nothing is liquid here. We want to manifest from the level when all that somehow already losing sharp contours, ideally molten. when we can reach that level, even touch that level, we can materialize anything. Of course, it's a far-reaching concept, materializing anything. But we need to understand that in principle, it is absolutely possible. It is possible to materialize the entire universe. But of course, it will require drawing back at such fundamental level of reality, where that, what we call universe, springs forth. So of course, few between can do that. But for a simple folk as ourselves, we can certainly touch that level where the subtlest formation of thought comes forth. And if we do that, then we truly check the value of the desire in terms of its relevance if we truly want something. And at the very same time, we release that energy from that level for it to become the very impulse to bring something forth into manifestation. So this has to be tested and tasted to truly understand what it represents here. I'd like to add something more to that. It's almost tempting to say that manifestation is most powerful from a place where we are so fulfilled, so feel in terms of alignment with everything, that we don't want anything. If we touch that level, from the level when we don't want anything, we can manifest anything. And this is not some kind of like a magic, it's not trickstery. This is the reality of consciousness. So this is the uniqueness and the beauty of the Patanjali Sutras and the approach taken in that particular chapter, which is known historically, scholarly known. It's a controversial part of the sutras, of course, because it deals with the phenomenal powers, it deals with siddhis, it deals with these psychic powers, right? Like all that domain of, flying, walking on water, becoming enormous, becoming small as, minute. But of course, we're not talking about this classical siddhis, We're talking about the applicable aspect of the sutras that can certainly improve our life, the way we think and the way we go about our objectives.
So given all the encouraging resonance and feedback from participants who took this program, myself included, how do you see this unfolding?
Well, I would first and foremost would love to have the feedback now of those who would be willing to partake this program through this, let's say, online means, to see and to be able to assess the effectiveness of this. Because sharing the field and introducing this in the way it was in our live event, in this particular setting, is one thing. But the effectiveness of that, of how it translates, let's say, and transmits in terms of its value in a different format, that's number one. I would like to also have a longer term feedback from those like yourself and, let's say, our Sangha, to see how this particular program that we have implemented, structured into our sadhana, would impact everyone's life. This, let's say, speaking about it with the feet on the ground. And of course, I can see this in line of that continued unfoldment that simply comes and asked to be implemented as that continuity of being the guardians of this, what is required right now, perhaps more than ever in the history of human civilization. I don't know if this is an exaggeration or overstatement, but these attempts we could see historically being marked by introduction, implementation, consciousness-based methodologies that meant to create true, measurable shift in collective consciousness, just as TM Siddhis were introduced back in the late 70s, with all the ensuing feedback and clinical research that followed. That what happens at the level of collective consciousness when one root square of the population is engaged in these practices impacts the entire environment, not just people. It impacts the whole sphere of existence. So it may sound like a very lofty, far-reaching aspirations, but I would like to, and do hope that it adds to that what is most needed, perhaps right now, in this moment in time, where so many consciously aligned beings do their best to add to that velocity that we all need now, perhaps again, more than ever, in terms of the collective state of affairs. So I can see this direct correlation that could be spoken of in terms of personal development, personal in terms of what the person represents. Person represents here the universal point of view. The personal represents here the cosmic. Through the personal, the cosmos is experiencing itself. It's a self-interacting dynamics of consciousness. And how that in turn impacts the collective state of affairs in terms of resonance it creates. So, yes, of course, it may and most likely will undergo some modifications. We've introduced just 14 sutras. Let's see how it unfolds, what it does. And yeah, I'm very, very looking forward to see how it literally is, to give it to the language, when the rubber hits the road, and how it is tested against the harshness and coarseness of life. Whether this delivers, where it really answers to the promises of that, what coalesced here deep within the heart of each and everyone who took the courage to partake in this.
Well, I'm also very excited and can't wait to see where this goes.
Great. Thank you, Jake.